I texted the wrong number and he came.
The arm broke at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in November. Nora Callahan knew the exact time because she had been staring at the microwave clock when it happened. The green digits reading 11:47, the mechanical hum of the appliance absurdly ordinary against the sound that followed. A crack, clean, sharp, final. The kind of sound that does not belong in a kitchen. The kind that rewrites everything that comes after it. Her brain refused to accept it for 2 full seconds. Then the pain arrived. Not gradually, not building from a simmer. It detonated. She went down hard onto the marble floor, knees first, then her hip catching the edge of the kitchen island on the way down. The impact rattled her back teeth. The sound that came out of her was not a scream. It was something smaller and more desperate than a scream. A high, airless thing, the sound a person makes when pain has moved beyond the reach of language. She pressed her forehead against the cold marble and tried to breathe. Preston Gaunt stood over her. He was still breathing hard. His dress shirt was untucked on one side, expensive white cotton, pulling loose from charcoal slacks. He had been home from a client dinner for 38 minutes. It had taken him 31 of those minutes to arrive at this precise outcome. Nora on the floor, himself standing over her, a thin smear of blood across 2 knuckles of his right hand. Not much blood, just enough to catch the light from the overhead fixture. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has broken and is already deciding how to categorize the damage. "You made me do that," he said. His voice had already come back down from the edge. That was the thing about Preston Gaunt. The speed of his recovery, the way he could move from detonation back to something that almost resembled calm in under a minute. She had watched him do it dozens of times across 18 months. She had made the mistake early on of believing each time was the last time. "Do you understand me?" he said. It was not a question. Nora did not answer. Could not. Her left arm was bent at an angle that was wrong, pressed against her ribs, and every shallow breath she pulled in sent white fire from her elbow to her shoulder socket. She kept her eyes on the grout lines in the marble floor, gray and precise and indifferent. She focused on those lines because if she looked up at Preston right now, she did not know what would happen inside her chest, and she could not afford to find out. Preston paced. That was what he always did afterward. He moved to the liquor cabinet in the living room and poured 3 fingers of whiskey into a crystal glass with the casualness of a man pouring a drink at the end of an ordinary day. He swirled it once. He did not look at her immediately. Outside, rain hammered Philadelphia. It had been raining since mid-afternoon. The kind of November rain that came in sideways and turned the streets 32 floors below into the rivers of reflected light. From up here, the world was nothing but darkness and water, and the distant smear of headlights moving through the city like slow breath. Nora had loved that view once. When she first moved in, 18 months ago, she had stood at those floor-to-ceiling windows and thought she was the luckiest woman alive. She lay on the kitchen floor now and stared at the grout lines and tried not to pass out. Preston's came back. He stopped near her but did not crouch. He looked at her the way you look at a problem you are calculating the cost of. "Get up," he said. She tried. The attempt moved her arm and the pain turned the edges of the room gray. "I cannot," she whispered. Something crossed his face. Not guilt. Something closer to inconvenience. The expression of a man whose evening had been complicated by circumstances he considered outside his control. He grabbed his coat from the hook near the door. The long, black cashmere one. He shrugged it on. "You stay right there," he said, his voice dropping into something cold and quiet and deliberate. "And think very carefully about how far you push me tonight." He picked up his keys. "Do not call anyone," he added. It was not a request. The weight of it sat on the air like something physical. "I mean it, Nora." The deadbolt engaged with a sound like a gunshot. Then silence. Not complete silence. There was still the rain. Still the faint pulse of the city far below. Still the mechanical hum of a luxury apartment at midnight, doing its quiet job of being expensive and indifferent to human suffering. But the absence of Preston settled over the penthouse like a held breath. Nora waited 1 full minute. She listened for the elevator doors down the hall, the distant mechanical sound of descent. Then she moved. Getting across the floor to the living room couch was not a dignified process. She used her right arm and her knees, dragging herself across the marble in slow increments, stopping twice when movement jostled her left arm, and the pain clamped down hard enough to tunnel her vision. By the time she reached the couch, she was soaked through with cold sweat. Her hair had come loose. She did not bother fixing it. Her phone, she had heard it hit the floor during the confrontation and slide beneath the couch. She pressed her cheek against the hardwood of the living room floor and squinted into the dark space underneath, a glint of cracked glass near the far leg. She reached under with her right hand, fingers searching, finding the edge of the phone, dragging it out. The screen was spider-webbed from corner to corner. The battery icon in the top right corner read 2%. 2%. Nora sat up against the base of the couch and unlocked the screen with her thumb, the cracked glass pressing lightly into her skin. Her hands were shaking. Not just from pain, though the pain was significant, a constant presence radiating from her elbow upward. The shaking came from the adrenaline crash that follows fear of the sustained kind. The fear that rewires your nervous system and does not release you even after the immediate danger leaves the room. She needed Ren. Ren Halsey, who had been her closest friend since the second year of college, who answered her phone at any hour without complaint, who had told Nora 8 months into her relationship with Preston that something about him made the back of her neck cold. Nora had laughed it off. She had introduced Ren to Preston at a dinner on a rooftop in the summer and told herself that Ren was being overprotective. Ren had not been overprotective. Nora navigated to her messages with a shaking thumb. The screen kept flickering from the damage. Ren's name sat near the top of the list. Nora tapped it open the thread and began typing. Her hands were too unsteady for precision. She hit wrong letters. Autocorrect filled in guesses. She did not have time to correct every mistake because the battery was dying, and Preston could come back, and every second she spent staring at the screen was a second she did not have. She typed what mattered, the essential facts, her location, a plea stripped down to its bones. Preston broke my arm. Please help me. Apartment 32, see Riverside Tower. Hurry. She hit send. The screen went black immediately. Not the gradual fade of low battery conservation. The hard, instant black of a device that has simply run out. The phone shutting down in the same breath as the message departed. Nora stared at the dead screen for a long moment. Then she pressed it against her chest and leaned her head back against the cushion of the couch and closed her eyes. She had gotten the message out. That was what mattered. Ren would come. Ren always came. She focused on breathing through the pain and waiting. What she did not know, could not know, with a dead phone pressed to her chest in a dark apartment above a rain-soaked city, was that the message had not reached Ren Halsey. 3 weeks earlier, Ren had switched phone carriers. A new plan, a new number. She had mentioned it to Nora once casually over the phone in the middle of a busy afternoon. Nora had said she would update the contact. She had kept meaning to. She had kept forgetting. The number stored under Ren's name in her contact list was 9 months out of date. The text had gone somewhere else entirely. The private phone was a matte black device that Marcello Vane kept completely separate from everything else in his life. Different carrier, different number. Registered to a name that existed only on paper and corresponded to no living person. Fewer than 8 people in the world held that number. His attorney, his personal physician, 2 members of his inner circle, his sister in Boca Raton, though she used it rarely. The phone almost never received messages from unknown numbers. When it buzzed at 11:53 that Thursday night, Marcello was in the back booth of Club Carnova, the private venue that occupied the lower 3 floors beneath what the city's records still described as a decommissioned opera house in the Washington Square district. The place had been closed to the public for 11 years. The chandeliers still worked. The bar was fully stocked. The acoustics were excellent, which meant the low pulse of music from the floor below reached the upper lounge at exactly the right frequency, present enough to fill the silence, quiet enough to think. He had been thinking. He was often thinking these days, which was not unusual, but the quality of his thoughts tonight carried a harder edge than ordinary. There were decisions approaching that could not be postponed much longer, the kind that moved pieces on a board and could not be unmoved. He sat with a glass of sparkling water. He rarely drank during working hours, and his working hours were flexible by nature. He turned a pen between his fingers without writing anything. Luca Ferraro sat across from him, reviewing something on a tablet, occasionally offering quiet observations that Marcello acknowledged with minimal responses. Luca had been his closest associate for 11 years. He had learned over that time to read the calibration of Marcello's silences. He did not push. The phone buzzed. Marcello glanced at the screen out of habit. Unknown contact. That alone was enough to make him look again. Everyone who had this number was stored. He read the message once. Preston broke my arm. Please help me. Apartment 32. See Riverside Tower. Hurry. He read it again. The pen stopped moving between his fingers. There was a moment, perhaps 3 seconds, where the rest of the room continued to exist at its normal volume and pace, and Marcello sat very still inside it, reading the message a third time. The music pulsed beneath them. Luca turned a page on the tablet. The chandelier above threw its honey-colored light across the upholstery of the booth. Marcello set the pen down. Luca, he said. Something in the single word made Luca look up immediately. 11 years of working beside Marcello Vaughn had calibrated him to certain frequencies. That tone, flat and controlled, with something moving underneath it that was not quite anger, but was related to anger the way thunder is related to lightning. That tone meant everything else in the room could wait. He waited. Marcello turned the phone screen across the table. Luca read the message. His expression shifted in a way that told Marcello the other man understood the weight of it without needing it explained. Wrong number, Luca said. Maybe. I need to know who sent it, Marcello said. Luca was already moving to a different application on his tablet. He had resources for exactly this kind of work. A network of telecom connections that had taken years and considerable cost to build useful, perhaps half a dozen times in any given year, in ways no legitimate enterprise could replicate. He had a name in under 2 minutes. Registered to Nora Callahan, he said. 27 years old. Address comes back to Riverside Tower on 32nd Street. He paused. 32nd floor. What is in 32C at Riverside Tower? More typing. A longer pause. Preston Gaunt. 36. Portfolio Investment Management. He runs money for clients who prefer not to ask questions about the returns. Luca paused again. His name has come up in our circles before. Not directly. He services accounts connected to the Feld organization peripherally, several layers removed. Marcello stood up. He did it with the economy of motion that characterized most of what he did. No wasted movement, no scraping of chair legs. He was simply seated, and then he was standing, and the shift in his posture carried a gravity that made the 2 men positioned near the entrance straighten slightly without being told to. Get the car, Marcello said. Call Cole and the 2 from the outer detail. Luca was already moving. He paused once at the edge of the booth. It could be a wrong number, he said. Carefully, the way you say the name of someone standing too close to an edge. Could be, Marcello agreed. He was already buttoning his coat. Get the car anyway. The convoy moved through Philadelphia with the unhurried assurance of vehicles that understood they would not be pulled over. 3 black SUVs with dark windows cutting through red lights. Marcello sat in the back of the middle vehicle and watched the city pass through rain-blurred glass. He was thinking about his mother. He did not often permit himself to do that. It was a deliberate discipline developed over years, the way an old injury teaches you to shift weight to the limb that still holds. You learn to route around the places that no longer bear the load. But something in the message had opened a crack in the back of his skull, and the memory came through the crack the way cold air comes through a gap in a wall. His mother's name had been Rosa. She had been 31 years old when his father broke her jaw on a Tuesday evening in a 4-room apartment in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Marcello had been 8 years old. He had been standing in the hallway outside the kitchen door when it happened. He remembered the sound. He had never found a way to unremember it. Certain sounds carve themselves into the architecture of a person. They become load-bearing walls. You build everything that comes after on top of them, whether you choose to or not, and the structures you raise reflect their shape, whether you realize it or not. He watched the rain streak the window. He thought about the message. 6 words. The stripped syntax of someone in too much pain or too much fear for anything extra. The please, the hurry. He had received a great many communications in his life, elaborate and carefully constructed, and very few of them had carried that weight. There was no performance in it, no calculation. Someone had typed those words in the dark with shaking hands because there was nothing left but those words, and the chance that someone on the other end might hear them. He had heard them. The convoy stopped in front of Riverside Tower at 12:11 in the morning. The building was exactly what its address had advertised. glass and steel and the quiet ostentation of New Philadelphia money. A lobby with a security desk and a doorman and a camera positioned in every corner. The doorman was a heavy-set man in his 50s who took one look at four men in dark coats coming through the revolving doors with the calm of people who went where they chose and registered it correctly as a situation that exceeded his pay grade. He reached for the phone at the security desk. Luca put a hand on the counter before he could lift the receiver. "Apartment 32, Luca said quietly. "We know the way." The doorman looked at Luca's hand on the counter. He looked at the other three men. He looked at Marcello, who had not broken stride and was already crossing the lobby toward the elevators with the kind of focus that made spaces part around him like water. The doorman put the phone down. The elevator was mirrored on three sides. Marcello watched his own reflection rise floor by floor. The dark coat, the lines of his face, the expression he wore when something inside him had already made up its mind and the rest of him was simply catching up. He looked like what he was. He had made a certain peace with that a long time ago. 32nd floor. The doors opened onto a carpeted hallway with recessed lighting and the hush of expensive buildings at midnight. Two directions. Marcello turned right without hesitation. He heard Preston before he reached the door. The sound was muffled by the apartment wall and the thick carpeting of the hallway, but it was identifiable. A male voice at the frequency of a man resuming an argument after an interruption. Preston had come back. Marcello processed this information with the same flat calm he processed most things and kept walking. He stopped in front of 32C. From inside, Preston's voice. Then a crack of something striking furniture. Then a sharp female intake of breath that was cut short in a way that told him everything he needed to know about what was happening on the other side of that door. He looked at Cole. Cole hit the door with his shoulder at the precise angle and force of someone who had performed this action professionally, and the door came away from the frame on the hinge side with a sound like the apartment itself had simply given up resisting. Marcello stepped through. Preston Gaunt was standing in the center of the living room, coat still on, keys still in his hand. He had apparently arrived back only minutes before them. He spun at the sound of the door. His face moved through a rapid sequence. Shock. Confusion. The automatic reach for authority that men like Preston Gaunt used the way other men used weapons. Nora was against the far wall. She had pulled herself up onto the couch at some point and then had apparently tried to stand when she heard Preston return because she was half standing, half crouched against the arm of the couch, with her left arm held against her body at an angle that was wrong. Deeply wrong. The wrongness visible from across the room in the way that certain injuries announce themselves from a distance because the human body simply does not arrange itself that way. Her face was tear-streaked. Her hair was loose and tangled. She wore a gray sweater that had a small dark stain on the shoulder that Marcello noted and chose not to examine twice because examining it twice would cost him something he needed to keep right now. Her eyes found him across the wrecked door frame in the ruined room. She stared. He crossed the room in 8 steps and none of them were fast. They were deliberate and measured the walk of someone who had already decided every subsequent thing before his foot touched the floor. Preston, who had been winding himself up to say something with force, seemed to sense in those 8 steps that the categories of authority he usually operated within had ceased to apply to this moment, and the thing he had been preparing to say dissolved before it reached his mouth. "Did he do that to you?" Marcello asked. His voice came out quiet. Not soft. Quiet is a different thing. Soft is gentle. Quiet is controlled in a way that soft is not. And the difference between them in a room like this one at this hour was the kind of difference that men like Preston Gaunt occasionally grasped too late. Nora nodded once. Preston laughed. A short and nervous sound. The social reflex of a man whose usual instruments had stopped working and who was cycling through remaining options. "Listen," he said. "Whatever you think this is between me and my girlfriend. A private matter. I do not know who you are or how you got in here, but you need to step back." Marcello turned from Nora to Preston. He had been looking at her when Preston started talking, and he turned from her to him, the way a searchlight turns, with mechanical patience and no hurry. He looked at Preston Gaunt for the first time with his full attention, the way you examine something you intend to break and want to break correctly. Preston's laugh drained from his face. He managed one more sentence. "Do you even know who I am?" Marcello said yes. Then he crossed the room. The punch landed with a sound like a door slamming shut. Preston went over the dining table in a scatter of glass and overturned candle holders and landed on the floor on the far side with the sound of a man whose nervous system was attempting to reboot. He got up. That was the thing. He got up, which told Marcello something specific about Preston Gaunt's character. Not courage. Preston did not have courage. What he had was a variety of pride that could not tolerate being repositioned in the hierarchy of a room, and that pride overrode the rational portion of his brain that should have told him to remain on the floor. He swung. Marcello caught the wrist. He caught it with the automaticity of someone catching a ball thrown predictably. The motion that followed was brief and clinical and ended with a sound that Preston had recently made Nora listen to in reverse. The same architecture of sound, the same structural failure. Preston's voice reached a register it had likely not reached since childhood. Luca and Cole kept him from falling. Not from kindness, but to keep him vertical, while Marcello stepped close enough to speak without raising his voice above a conversational level. "You broke her arm," Marcello said. "So now you have some understanding of what that word means." He paused, helpless. He tilted his head slightly. "Say it." Preston said nothing. Cole adjusted his grip. Preston said the word. Marcello held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he stepped back and adjusted his right cuff, which had come slightly undone, and turned away from Preston with the finality of someone closing a drawer that did not need to be opened again tonight. He walked back to Nora. She had not moved from the arm of the couch. She was watching him with an expression he could not entirely decode. Shock, yes, pain underneath the shock. And beneath both of those, something more complex that he recognized, not because he had seen it on her face before, but because he had seen it on his own face once years ago in a mirror in a bathroom in Brooklyn after the night his father left for the last time. The look of someone whose understanding of how the world operates has been revised without warning and who has not yet decided what to build in its place. He shrugged off his coat. It was an automatic gesture. He moved behind her and settled the coat carefully around her shoulders. The coat was heavy and warm and slightly damp from the rain outside, and it was the best available option, and he was aware of her flinching slightly when the fabric grazed her left shoulder. "Sorry," he said quietly. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. Something passed between them in that space that neither of them would have been able to accurately name afterward. A recognition, perhaps, or the silence that occurs when two people are standing in the wreckage of something and both understand that what comes next is not going to be simple or fast or easily categorized. He bent slightly and with care slid one arm beneath her knees and one behind her back. "I'm going to lift you," he said. "Tell me when it is too much." She placed her right hand against his chest, and he lifted her, and she made one short sound against the pain and then pressed her face into the lapel of his jacket and went quiet. He carried her to the elevator. Cole and Luca flanked them in the hallway. The other 2 men remained in the apartment to handle what needed handling. Marcello did not look back. Nora from his arms looked back once through the destroyed door frame, across the wreckage of overturned furniture and scattered glass, to where Preston Gaunt lay on his imported marble floor, surrounded by the architecture of the life he had constructed and the man he actually was. She looked at him for 2 seconds. Then she turned her face away. The elevator doors closed on the 32nd floor. Marcello stood with her in his arms, in the mirrored box dropping toward the lobby, and he could feel her breathing against his jacket. Her right hand still rested loosely on his chest. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper, not demanding, more like someone thinking out loud, trying to locate the edges of something that had no obvious shape. He considered several answers. "The wrong number," he said. She made a sound that might have been almost a laugh if everything had not hurt quite so much. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Marcello carried Nora Callahan through the glass and marble of Riverside Tower, past the doorman who studied the floor, as they passed through the revolving doors and out into the Philadelphia night. The rain had not stopped. 3 black SUVs waited at the curb, engines running headlights cutting through the wet dark. Luca moved ahead and opened the rear door of the center vehicle. Marcello stepped off the curb into the rain without breaking stride, and the rain hit his jacket and hit Nora's borrowed coat, and the city reflected in the puddles around their feet. He got her settled in the back seat with the careful geometry of someone managing something that matters, and he climbed in beside her, and Luca shut the door, and the convoy moved. Nora leaned against the window, Her eyes were half closed. The adrenaline was leaving her, and what it left behind was only the pain and the weight of the night and the hollowness of someone who has been running on fear for so long that when the fear finally recedes, there is nothing immediately behind it to fill the space. Marcello sat beside her and looked through the windshield at the wet streets ahead. He was already thinking about the next problem. Not Preston Gaunt. Preston was handled for the present moment, which was not the same as handled permanently, and Marcello was already beginning to calculate what permanently would require and what it would cost, and whether Raymond Feld's tangential connection would complicate matters in the short term. But the thing pressing hardest on him right now was the phone. His private phone with its 8 contacts and its unlisted number and its 11-year record of absolute discretion. Nora Callahan had sent a message to that number, which meant she had that number somewhere, which meant either someone had given it to her or she had obtained it through some other means, and either of those possibilities opened questions that needed to be understood before he could decide what the situation actually was. He glanced at her in the dark of the back seat. She had her eyes fully closed now. Her right hand rested loose in her lap. His coat was still around her shoulders. She was pale. Her arm needed real medical attention. An emergency room x-rays a proper cast. He was taking her to a physician he trusted, a man named Franklin Osei, who had treated a number of people in Marcello's circle over the years without asking the kinds of questions that did not need to be asked. She looked younger than 27 right now, sitting in the dark with her eyes closed and her arm broken in 18 months of something terrible written in the set of her jaw. Marcello looked back through the windshield. The convoy turned south toward Fairmount, and the private phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. Not a text this time. An incoming call from a number he did not recognize. The display read a string of digits that did not resolve into any standard area code, which meant it was either routed through something or generated by something, and neither of those options was casual. People who legitimately held his private number did not call from numbers like that. People who had found his private number did. He answered. He did not speak first. That was a habit worn smooth by years of knowing that silence is itself a form of information. Whoever was on the other end would fill it, and what they chose to fill it with would tell him more than any question he might have asked. 3 seconds of quiet. Then a voice he did not know, male, somewhere between 30 and 50. No regional accent he could isolate. The deliberate vocal neutrality of someone who had spent considerable time learning not to give anything away in how they spoke. Interesting night you are having, the voice said. Marcello said nothing. Riverside Tower, the voice continued. Apartment 32. See 3 black vehicles. You carried her out yourself. A brief pause. That last detail surprised me. I would not have predicted that specific choice. Marcello kept his voice level. Who are you? Someone who has been watching Preston Gaunt for a considerable amount of time, the voice said. And someone who is now, as a result of what happened tonight, watching you. He paused. She was mine. I need you to bring her in. Number. The word came out flat and immediate without deliberation. Silence on the line. She has a broken arm, Marcello said. She is going to a physician. After that, she will be somewhere safe. When she has had time to rest and think clearly, we can discuss whatever you believe needs discussing. Until then, the answer is no. I do not have that kind of time, the voice said, and for the first time, something cracked in the surface a bit. A compression of urgency pushing through the neutral exterior. Tonight changed the timeline. Preston is going to run. When he runs, 3 years of carefully constructed work goes with him. Marcello ended the call. He lowered the phone to his knee and looked at its blank screen for a moment. Then he returned it to his jacket pocket. Luca had half turned in the front seat, reading the room the way he always did, quietly and accurately. You want to tell me what that was, Luca said. Not yet. Luca turned back to face the road. His jaw was set. Nora had opened her eyes. The change in the car's atmosphere had pulled her back from wherever she had been drifting. She was watching Marcello's profile in the dark. Was that about me? She asked. He looked at her. She was pale, the broken arm held carefully against her body, his coat wrapped around her shoulders. She was not, he noticed, as fragile as she currently appeared. Something in her eyes underneath the pain and the shock had a quality of careful attention, of a person reading a room quickly and accurately. 18 months with Preston Gaunt had trained that capacity into her, because in that apartment, reading the room fast was one of the ways you survived. It was about Preston, Marcello said. That is not what I asked. He looked at her for a moment. We will talk after the physician, he said. She held his gaze. She did not like the answer. She accepted it, which was a different thing entirely. Dr. Franklin Osei lived and worked out of a brownstone in the Fairmount neighborhood, 3 blocks from the art museum, in a building that from the outside looked exactly like every other renovated brownstone on the street. The lower 2 floors contained a medical facility that did not appear in any public directory and had no affiliation with any hospital system. Franklin Osei was 61 years old, had spent 3 years in trauma surgery at Temple University Hospital before a professional difficulty had ended that chapter of his career, and had been in Marcello's orbit for 9 years. He was precise and discreet and constitutionally incapable of being destabilized by what came through his door at unusual hours. He met them at the back entrance. He looked at Nora's arm for 4 seconds. Radial fracture, he said. Midshaft probably clean. I need the imaging to confirm. He looked at her face. Did you lose consciousness at any point? No, Nora said. Did you hit your head? My shoulder caught the edge of the kitchen island. Not my head. He nodded, and something in the clinical efficiency of his assessment seemed to help her. The simple, competent fact of someone treating her injury as a medical problem with medical solutions rather than a catastrophe requiring management visibly steadied her. She straightened slightly. Come in, Franklin said. The imaging confirmed a clean fracture of the radius midshaft. Franklin splinted the arm and began wrapping it with the focused quiet of someone performing a task they had performed many hundreds of times. He administered a mild analgesic enough to take the sharpest edge off the pain without compromising her alertness. Marcello stood against the far wall with his arms crossed. Nora watched the physician work for a time. Then she said, How do you know him? We have an arrangement, Marcello said. What kind of arrangement? The kind where he does not ask me questions and I do not ask him questions. She looked at him. You just asked me questions. I asked you one thing. You already knew the answer. He said nothing to that. Franklin finished and stepped back to consider his work. You will need an orthopedic surgeon in the next few days for a proper cast. The splint will hold for now. He looked at Nora directly. Is there somewhere safe you can go tonight? Nora considered the question. The answer was more complicated than it should have been, which was its own kind of information about what the last 18 months had built around her and dismantled at the same time. Her apartment in South Philadelphia, the one she had given up when she moved into Preston's penthouse, gone. Her mother's house in Wilmington was possible, but her mother was 72 years old, and receiving this call at 2 in the morning was not something Nora was prepared to do to her. Wren's apartment in Fishtown. Yes, she said. I need to borrow someone's phone first. Marcello produced his secondary phone and held it out without comment. She took it. She dialed Wren's number from memory. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail again. She left a message short and stripped down to essentials, the same instinct for economy that had characterized the original text from the apartment. She handed the phone back to Marcello. Thank you, she said. And then, because she clearly felt the inadequacy of those 2 words for the scope of what had happened tonight, she began to say something else. Marcello shook his head slightly. She stopped. Outside, he said, when you are ready. He pushed off from the wall and walked out of the room, leaving Nora with Franklin in the antiseptic light. He stood in the narrow hallway and looked at the wall opposite and permitted himself for precisely 45 seconds to feel the weight of the evening, the accumulated mass of it, his mother's jaw, the sound he had never found a way to unremember. 20 years of building something and becoming someone and moving far enough from that Brooklyn hallway that it had begun to feel like another century, another person entirely. And still, one text message in the right register of pain, and here he was, standing in a stranger's medical facility at 1 in the morning with 4 men outside, and a woman with a broken arm behind a closed door, and a phone call from someone who knew his private number, burning in the back of his skull. He pressed one hand flat against the wall. 45 seconds. Then he straightened, arranged his expression back where it needed to be, and walked out to find Luca. Luca was near the back door with the stance of a man who had been organizing something to say and had decided how to approach it. Talk, Marcello said. Cole called from the apartment. Luca kept his voice low. Preston Gaunt is gone. He left on foot approximately 8 minutes after our convoy departed. He took a bag, not an overnight bag, a go bag, pre-packed. He looked at Marcello. He did not call anyone from the apartment before leaving. He simply took the bag and walked out. He knew where he was going before tonight, Marcello said. Cole thinks so. Marcello looked at the far end of the hallway. Preston had a pre-packed bag, which meant Preston had anticipated at some level the possibility of needing to disappear quickly, which meant Preston understood his own situation with considerably more clarity than someone who simply processed money for private clients and believed himself safe. Preston was afraid of something before tonight, something that had nothing to do with Marcello. The second thing Luca said, Marcello waited. Raymond Feld called. Luca paused, not through intermediaries, him personally, on your business line. He paused again. He is aware of what happened tonight, not happy about it. Preston managed money for him, past tense in Feld's framing. He said, and Luca's expression communicated exactly what he thought of the tone. He said, your friend made a mess I now have to clean up, and I would appreciate a conversation. Marcello pressed his lips together. Raymond Feld was the oldest continuous operation in the Philadelphia metro. Third generation, the institutional weight of inherited machinery rather than genuine competence. Cautious to the point of cowardice in most circumstances, which meant when he called personally at 2 a.m, the calculations somewhere in his world had shifted significantly. Tell him I will call tomorrow, Marcello said. He said tonight. Tell him tomorrow. Luca typed the message with the expression of a man at peace with delivering an answer that would land badly. The back door opened and Nora came through it with Franklin behind her. The arm was splinted and bound in a sling. She had washed her face at some point. The exhaustion underneath was clean and present, but she was contained now. The shock had metabolized into something she was actively managing rather than drowning in. She looked at Marcello. She looked at Luca. She made her assessment of the situation in approximately 2 seconds. Who was on the phone, she asked. Marcello turned to face her fully. Someone who says they were running an operation against Preston, he said. They want to speak with you. They were watching the apartment. They knew about tonight within minutes. He watched her face. They called my private line, which means they knew I was there, which means they have significant resources. He paused. Do you know anything about Preston's actual business? Not the cover. The real business. She looked at him for a long moment. He moved money, she said carefully. For people who needed it, moved without documentation. I knew there were things he did not tell me. I stopped asking. She paused and the weight of something unspoken moved behind her eyes. There were calls he took in other rooms, men who came to the apartment who were not social visits. I ate dinner in the bedroom once because he told me to stay there. She looked at the floor. I am not stupid. I know what kind of work that was. I simply chose for reasons I am no longer willing to defend not to ask the question that would have required me to act on the answer. Marcello held her gaze. What does this person want from me? She asked. I do not know yet. But they called, he said, and I answered. And now the situation is what it is. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain continued its patient work against the city. Then she looked at him with that quality of assessment he had been noting since the apartment, working through the math of it. Why did you come tonight? She asked. He looked at her. You do not know me, she said. You could have decided it was a wrong number and moved on. Most people would have. Marcello said nothing for a moment. My mother, he said. That was all. 2 words. He did not elaborate and he did not look away from her. And she understood from those 2 words and the precise way they were delivered, stripped of everything except what they needed to contain exactly what they held. She did not push. She nodded once. Okay, she said. What happens now? She asked. You go somewhere safe. You sleep in the morning when Ren calls back. She is not going to Ren's tonight, Luca said from near the door. Someone watched that apartment. They know her face. If they have the resources to find your private number, they have the resources to find Ren Halsey's address. Nora looked at Luca, then at Marcello. My people have a location, Marcello said. It is secure. No one enters without my knowledge. The resistance arrived in her face exactly where he expected it. He had watched her move through 18 months of a situation that required rapid and accurate assessments of who could be trusted and what the cost of that trust would be, and that capacity did not simply switch off because the immediate danger had changed shape. I am not Preston, he said quietly. I know you are not Preston, she said immediately with a sharpness that indicated she resented the implication that she required that clarification. I have met men like Preston. You are not one of them. She paused. You are something else. I do not know what yet. He accepted that. It was fair. Come with us tonight, he said. Tomorrow you know more. Tomorrow you make different decisions if that is what you want. But tonight you are not safe on your own, and you know that. She held his gaze for a long beat. Then she looked at her arm in its sling. Do you have ibuprofen anywhere? She asked. We will find some. Okay, she said. They went out through the back door into the rain. The convoy was waiting. Luca opened the door. Nora climbed in without asking for assistance, managing the geometry of her arm and the height of the vehicle with a careful deliberateness and a tightening of her jaw that she allowed and no more. Marcello noted all of this, noted what it said about her. The convoy moved north and east through streets that were mostly empty now, the rain thinning slightly, but still present. The city in its deep night register of half-lit windows and wet pavement. Marcello's phone did not ring again. That was not reassuring. The voice on the call had been told no. People with the resources to find his private number did not absorb no in silence. They regrouped. They found other approaches. Luca spoke from the front seat without turning around, his voice carrying the flatness that Marcello had learned to recognize as something requiring immediate attention. We have a vehicle, 3 back, silver 4-door, picked us up when we left Franklin's location. It has been careful, 1 lane change for every 2 of ours, but it is there. Marcello turned to the rear window with the casual motion of someone adjusting position. Wet street, yellow headlights in the distance. 3 cars back a shape maintaining precise following distance. Do not lose them yet, Marcello said. Luca's eyes in the mirror. You are certain. I want to know where they stopped following, what that tells us about what they know. Nora beside him had heard. She was looking at his face. Someone is following us, she said. Yes, she absorbed this. No panic. Her breathing elevated slightly, a fine tension in the line of her shoulders. But she processed fear differently than most people he was learning. She did not let it make her decisions. 18 months of living with Preston Gaunt had trained that out of her, or perhaps it had always been there, and Preston had simply made it necessary. The person on the phone, she said. Possibly. Or someone else. He paused. Preston also has people we have not yet accounted for. She looked at the rear window, then back at him. Victor had people too, she said quietly. Marcello went very still. She looked at him directly. I am sorry, I meant Preston. She paused and exhaled. Preston had people I never met. But there were nights when he was afraid of something I could not see. Not afraid of me. Afraid of something with actual reach. She paused. I thought about that sometimes. About what kind of person would make someone like Preston Gaunt genuinely afraid. Marcello looked at her profile against the rain-dark window. And now you are looking at 1, he said. She turned from the window. 2, she said. Now I am looking at 2. Luca's voice came from the front seat, stripped to pure information. It is not a civilian vehicle. Cole closed the distance. Philadelphia PD plates unmarked. Detective configuration. The car was quiet for 2 full seconds. Someone made a call, Marcello said. Not Preston. He was running, not the voice on the phone. They were not calling the police. They were trying to avoid the police. Someone else, Nora said. Someone who was at that building tonight. Someone who saw Marcello Vaughn carry a woman out of Riverside Tower and made a calculation about what that information was worth. The doorman, Marcello said. He pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. Luca spoke. Options. Split the convoy. Get her somewhere clean. But if they have the plates on any of our vehicles, the picture is already partial. Nora said, they are going to want to speak with me. Both men looked at her. My arm is broken, she said. Preston Gaunt broke it. I am the victim in this, she held Marcello's gaze. You are the one who put him on the floor. Luca looked at the windshield. Marcello sat with all of it arranged in front of him. The voice on the phone, the detective vehicle 3 cars back, Raymond Feld's personal call, Sean Calloway, whoever that was, vanished at midnight. The private phone with 8 contacts that had somehow received a message from a woman he had never met. He looked at Nora. She looked back at him. I need to ask you something, he said. She waited. The person you intended to contact tonight, he said carefully. When you typed that number, was that actually Ren Halsey's number? Nora went very still. It was the stillness of the half-second when a piece of information you have been carrying without knowing its weight reveals exactly what it is. I have not called Ren in a few months, she said slowly. Preston made it difficult to maintain outside relationships. It was gradual. By the time I recognized what he was doing, I was all ready. She exhaled. She switched carriers. She told me about it. I meant to update the number in my phone. You did not, Marcello said. Number. So the number stored under her name is months out of date. She looked at him, the full implication arriving in her face in real time. I texted a wrong number, she said. Yes, your number. Yes. She looked at her hands. At the sling, at the middle distance that people fix their eyes on when they are reassembling their understanding of something. And if you had not answered, you would be in that apartment, Marcello said, alone with Preston when he came back. She already knew this, but hearing it stated plainly in the cold logical sequence of cause and effect, something shifted behind her eyes. She closed them briefly. When she opened them, something harder had settled there. Not gratitude, something on the other side of gratitude, which is the recognition of what the alternative was. And now, she said quietly, there is a police vehicle following us, and Preston is gone, and someone who knows your private number wants me brought in, and you have a man named Feld calling you at 2 in the morning. She said it back to him with the steady, unsentimental clarity of an inventory. Because of a wrong number. That is correct. She was quiet for a moment. I am sorry, she said. Do not be, he said. The detective vehicle dropped its tail at the next intersection. Simply ceased to follow. Luca confirmed it with 2 sentences and then said nothing else. Marcello understood immediately. They had not been following to discover a destination. They had been following to confirm who was in the vehicle. Now they knew. They had stopped because they already had what they came for. His private phone buzzed in his jacket. He pulled it out. A text. He read it, and the thing that moved in his expression was small and contained and specific. The adjustment of someone absorbing information that changes the map they have been navigating by. He turned the screen so Nora could read it. 4 words. Bring her in, now! Beneath that, a photograph. Grainy. Time-stamped 1:22 a.m. It showed Franklin Osei's back entrance. It showed Marcello carrying Nora out of the building. Her face was visible, and in the lower corner of the photograph, partially in frame, a badge clipped to a belt. Luca spoke from the front without having seen the screen. Marcello, we have a problem. I know. There are 2 units outside the Arch Street location. Cole just called. They were positioned there before you made the call to open it. Marcello stared at the 4 words on the screen. They were there before I called, he said. Yes. He looked at the photograph again. The timestamp, the badge, the angle of the camera suggesting a positioned device rather than a passing observer. They were not watching, Preston Nora said. She said it as a statement, not a question. He did not correct her. They were watching you, she said. The convoy moved through the rain-dark city, and somewhere behind them and ahead of them, and in the phone in his hand, the shape of the night was rearranging itself into something larger and more deliberate than anything either of them had believed it to be when it began. The convoy pulled into a parking structure on Arch Street at 1:44 in the morning, and Marcello told the driver to kill the headlights before they reached the 2nd level. They sat in the dark for 30 seconds. Nobody spoke. Rain drummed on the concrete above the entry ramp, muffled and continuous. The engine ticked as it cooled. Luca had his hand near his jacket in the front seat and was not making any effort to appear otherwise. The 2 men from the trailing vehicle were already moving through the structure's lower level in opposite directions, running the sweep that Marcello had not needed to request because they understood their function. Nora sat with her back straight and her eyes moving across the windshield with the careful inventory of someone cataloging exits. He had been noticing that about her since the apartment. The way she read spaces, the way her attention found doors and windows and points of access without appearing to look for them. 18 months of living inside a situation that could change without warning had rewired the way she moved through rooms, and that kind of rewiring did not undo itself in a single night. Talk to me, Marcello said to Luca. Franklin's back entrance is covered, which means they had a unit positioned there before you called for the location. Luca turned halfway in his seat. That is not reactive surveillance. That is pre-positioned, which means they knew the medical location before you went there. Either they followed us from Riverside Tower and moved ahead of us on the route, which would require knowing our patterns well enough to predict the destination, or... He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Someone gave them, Franklin, Marcello said. Luca looked at the steering wheel. Someone in my circle gave them, Franklin Marcello said. The parking structure around them was dim and concrete and smelled of oil and standing water. 3 levels of shadow above. The sweep team moving somewhere in the dark below. Nora had gone very still in the way she went still when she was absorbing something and was not yet ready to speak. It is a federal operation, Marcello said. Whatever they are building, it is federal. Local detectives do not coordinate with this kind of precision. They do not have pre-positioned assets at a private medical facility in a residential neighborhood at 1 in the morning. He looked at his private phone. The forward text sat on the screen. They have been running this long enough to have infrastructure in place, months at minimum. Preston is part of it, but not the whole of it. Preston is a thread, Luca said, not the fabric. Marcello thought about the voice on the call, the specific knowledge it carried. Riverside Tower, the convoy, the fact that he had carried her out personally, the medical location, his private number. Think about what that voice knew, Marcello said. He knew I was at Riverside Tower within minutes of my arrival. He had my private number. He had Franklin's address. He let those 3 things rest in the air of the car. That is not surveillance from a distance. That is access from the inside. The words sat between them. Luca did not respond for 4 seconds, which was a long time for Luca. How long has the private number been the same? Nora asked. Both men looked at her. She was watching them with the focused attention of someone who has decided that the conversation in the room is directly relevant to whether she survives the next 24 hours and is therefore going to participate in it, whether or not she has been formally invited. Your private phone, she said. That specific number. How long? 4 years, Marcello said. And the 8 people with access to it. Has that number changed at all? Any additions in the past year or so? Marcello looked at her. She met his gaze steadily. I am thinking out loud, she said. I am not accusing anyone of anything. I am following the logic. Marcello looked at Luca. Luca was already ahead of it. His expression had shifted into the focused grimness of a man who has been running a calculation in the back of his mind for several minutes and has just arrived at an answer he did not want to reach. Sean Calloway, Luca said. The name came out flat and quiet with the weight of a word you have been arguing against in your own head for longer than you want to admit. He came to us 14 months ago, recommendation through Garza in Baltimore. He runs 3 shell accounts in our financial structure. He has access to the medical facility roster because I put him on the emergency contacts list when he joined. Luca's voice had taken on a controlled, deliberate texture. The voice of a man managing something that is trying to become panic and refusing to let it. He has the private number because you gave it to him when he joined the inner circle. Standard protocol. I know what I gave him, Marcello said. He came through Garza, Luca said. Garza, who we have not had direct contact with in 6 months, because Garza's Baltimore operation was taken apart by a federal task force. Marcello said nothing. Garza's case, Luca said slowly. When did that begin? Roughly. 18 months ago, Marcello said. And Sean Calloway appeared in our circle. 14 months ago, Marcello said. Luca put both hands on top of the steering wheel and looked at them. They turned Garza, he said. Garza gave them Sean as an introduction to our organization. Sean came in as a planted asset. He exhaled through his nose. 14 months. He has been inside for 14 months. Marcello sat with this. 14 months of access to the financial architecture. 14 months of operational structure. 14 months of names and locations and the precise geography of how decisions were made and who executed them and where the pressure points were. 14 months of sitting in rooms where things were discussed while transmitting the contents of those rooms to people building a map for dismantling everything Marcello had spent 15 years constructing. A cold anger moved through him, not the hot kind, the cold kind, the kind that does not arrive loudly and does not announce itself and does not waste energy on expression, the kind that calculates. Where is Sean tonight, Marcello said. He checked in at 11. Said he was at Carnova for the weekly review. Luca was already on his phone. A brief exchange, low and quick. He set the phone down. Gone. Left around midnight. Told the staff he needed air. Right as we were at Riverside Tower. Yes. Pull up everything on his access. Everything he touched in the past 2 weeks. Every account he has visibility on. Every contact in his phone that routes through our network. Marcello's voice had not changed in volume or speed. It retained the same flat, controlled cadence it always had, and that was precisely what made it what it was. And find out where he is. Luca was dialing. Marcello looked at Nora. She had heard everything. She was watching him with an expression that combined the discomfort of someone holding information they did not ask for with something else, a recognition. The look of a person who has lived inside a betrayal long enough to know its shape when they encounter it in another form. "I am sorry," she said. "Stop apologizing." "I am not apologizing for myself," she said. "I know what it feels like to find out that someone you trusted was something other than what they appeared." She paused. Preston was not a planted asset. He was not sent to destroy me. He was simply someone I chose badly and stayed with too long for reasons that felt sufficient at the time. She looked at the sling, but the feeling is similar. You build your life around a version of someone, and then the version dissolves and everything you arranged around it has to be rearranged. It takes longer than one night. Marcello held her gaze. In another set of circumstances, he might have stayed inside that sentence with her for a moment. He noted it and moved forward. "We cannot stay here," he said to Luca. "The Arch Street location is covered. Franklin is burned temporarily." He moved through the mental inventory of locations, eliminating 3 immediately because Sean had touched them. 2 remained. "The Kensington warehouse," he said. "Sean does not have that address. It predates him, and I kept it off the shared records. It is not set up for. It does not need to be set up. It needs 4 walls and a door that locks." He looked at Nora. "Can you walk?" "I have been walking," she said. They moved out of the convoy vehicle and through the lower level of the parking structure, the sweep team materializing from the dark and falling in without instruction, up a stairwell that smelled of concrete and old water, and out a side entrance onto a street that was empty and rain-wet and reflected the amber of the streetlights in long, wavering lines across the asphalt. Luca had called ahead. 2 vehicles waiting 2 blocks east, different plates, no connection to the convoy. The transfer took 4 minutes. They were moving again by 2 in the morning. Nora sat in the back of a dark gray vehicle and said nothing for the first several minutes. Marcello sat beside her and looked through the windshield at the wet streets. He was thinking about the next problem, which was not Sean Calloway. Sean was manageable. Sean was a planted asset who had lost his cover and would surface somewhere and be reabsorbed by whatever operation had sent him in, and he would not return to Philadelphia, because returning to Philadelphia would be professionally and personally inadvisable. The problem was what Sean had given them over 14 months. 14 months of access was enough to build something prosecutable. Depending on how carefully Sean had moved through the organization, how much he had been able to confirm and document, it could be enough to end things. Not incapacitate. End. "The voice on the phone," Nora said eventually. Marcello looked at her. "The person who called after Riverside Tower, who said they were building a case against Preston." She paused. Could it be Sean? Marcello had already considered this. "No," he said. "The voice on that call was running an operation. Sean is an inside asset. He collects and transmits. He does not run. Different function, different level of the structure." He looked at the road. "The voice on the phone is the operation itself. Sean is a source they were running inside my organization to build the larger picture. So there is a federal investigation into Preston. Nora said it into you." "Yes, and they want me because I was in that apartment. Because 18 months in that apartment makes you a potential witness," Marcello said. "What you heard, what you saw, who came through the door. If they are building a financial case against Preston and the organizations he serviced a living witness, with 18 months of proximity to the operational life of the target, is worth considerably more to them than most of what Sean could have provided from outside of conversations." "I do not know anything useful," she said. "You know more than you think." She was quiet. "What happens to you?" she asked. "In the scenario where they get me in a room, they use what you give them to build what they already have," he said. "Against Preston, against his clients, against the organizations in his financial structure. Including yours, including mine." She turned to look at him directly. In the dark of the car, her face was composed. The exhaustion held back by something structural, the endurance of someone who has had the option of falling apart and looked at it clearly and decided against it. "I was in that apartment for 18 months, she said. "And I do not know your name, Marcello Vani." She paused. "I mean, I did not know your name before tonight. I had never heard it. Preston never mentioned you." "He would not. I am several layers removed from anything Preston would have known directly. But you know about him. I know about most things in this city that move money through the kinds of channels Preston used. So if I sit in their room and go through my memory, she said slowly, and they ask me about names, about people Preston discussed or feared or worked with, your name does not come up, because I genuinely do not have it. Marcello looked at her. Preston was careful about names, she said. He never gave me specifics. Descriptions sometimes. References. The people I work with. A client who needs certain things handled. He never gave me names. She paused. I thought it was him keeping me separate from the business side. It was also insurance. If something went wrong, the less I knew meant the less I could give anyone. Or Marcello said. She finished the thought herself, or he knew at some level that the less I knew, the less leverage anyone would have over him through me. She looked at the window, which means I am not as useful to them as they currently believe. I am useful, but not maximally. Luca had half turned in the front seat. She is not wrong, he said. They think she is a full witness. They do not know what Preston kept from her. Nora turned back to Marcello, which gives us something she said. They do not know that yet. The urgency in that text to bring her in now, that is not the confidence of people who have everything they need. That is the pressure of people who are missing something and believe I have it. Marcello looked at her for a moment longer than the exchange strictly required. You have thought about this kind of thing before, he said. I spent the better part of 14 months thinking about how to leave a situation that I could not simply walk away from, she said. When you spend enough time planning exits, you develop a practical understanding of leverage. The vehicles moved northeast into Kensington, where the city changed its register. Glass towers replaced by row houses and industrial structures, and the nighttime quiet of a neighborhood that worked early and slept accordingly. The warehouse sat at the end of a short block behind a chain-link fence. 2 stories of brick that had processed textiles in a previous decade and now processed nothing. Its windows dark, its loading dock empty. They entered through the side gate. Inside was what warehouses are: concrete floor, exposed ceiling joists, the smell of old industry and cold that accumulates in spaces that have gone unheated for long periods of time. Someone had been there before them. A folding table, 2 chairs, a space heater running in the corner. A bag on the table that turned out to contain water bottles, a pharmacy bag with ibuprofen and the additional supplies Franklin had specified in a sleeping bag still in its packaging. Functional. The minimum infrastructure of a place to think. Nora sat in one of the folding chairs and took 3 ibuprofen and drank half a water bottle without being prompted to do either. Marcello stood near the table and looked at both phones. Sean Calloway had not contacted either number since midnight. His location was not returning on any network. He had either shut his phone down or disposed of it. Damage assessment, Marcello said to Luca. Luca had been working his tablet continuously since the parking structure. He sat on the edge of the table and went through it with the methodical grimness of someone reading an accounting of a disaster they saw approaching and could not stop. 3 shell accounts confirmed compromised. Transaction patterns over the past 14 months showed data aggregation at intervals that align with Sean's access logs. He scrolled. The medical facility roster, the Arch Street location, the Carnova private entrance protocol. He paused. The private phone number. He set the tablet on the table. And the Feld connection. Sean attended 2 of the 3 meetings where the Feld arrangement was discussed. If they have those meetings, Marcello said, they have Raymond as well. Which is why Raymond called tonight, Luca said. He knows something broke. He does not know what yet, but he felt it. He is going to panic, Marcello said. Raymond felt panicking is a specific kind of problem. A man who had inherited institutional weight rather than earned operational competence, cornered and frightened, did not move carefully. He moved in whatever direction was directly in front of him, and he moved fast. And what was directly in front of Raymond Feld right now was Marcello Vane, who apparently had the same federal attention building in his direction, and who had tonight removed one of Raymond's primary financial assets from active function. He will try to make a deal, Marcello said. Before us. He will try to get there first. He is already trying, Luca said. That call was not about the apartment. That call was to read you, to find out how much you knew and how you would respond. Did he get anything? You told him tomorrow. He will read that as calm, which means either you know less than him or significantly more. He will decide you know more, which means he moves faster. They both understood what moving faster meant in Raymond Feld's vocabulary. Not a phone call, not a meeting. Raymond making a serious move meant Raymond using the instrument that third-generation organizations kept maintained for exactly these moments. The blunt instrument of preemptive action. Nora had been listening from the folding chair with both feet flat on the concrete floor and her right hand resting on her knee. If Feld makes a deal with the federal investigators first, she said he gives them information in exchange for protection. And if he provides them with your financial structure, Marcello said, then the case they have been building with Sean's information becomes prosecutable. She held his gaze steadily. To what degree? He looked at her. Enough to end this, he said. Not just the financial structure, the operational structure, the people structure, everything. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, then we need to find something they do not have yet. Marcello looked at her. The urgency in that text, she said again. They think I have something. Not just testimony, something specific. She paused, thinking through it in real time. Preston kept physical records. Off-network. I know because I saw him with them. Documents he handled differently from everything else. Paper, not digital. He had specific fears about electronic documentation. Luca straightened slowly. Physical transaction records, Marcello said. The actual paper trail, Luca said. Not the shell account summaries. The documentation that connects the shells to the real source organizations. He looked at Marcello. We have been trying to confirm whether those existed for months. If Federal has Sean's data, but not the physical records, the case has a structural gap, a significant one. Preston would have taken them, Marcello said. Nora's voice shifted in quality, something in it that made both men look at her immediately. Or she said they are not with Preston at all. Marcello waited. Preston had a safe, she said, behind a painting in the master bedroom, a large canvas, black and gold on white. I knew about it. He did not know I knew. She looked at her hands. He changed the combination twice while I was in the apartment. Both times he believed I was asleep. She paused. Preston consistently underestimated what I was paying attention to. You know the combination, Marcello said. I know both combinations he used. He tends to use dates, significant ones. I have had 18 months to pay attention to which dates matter to Preston Gaunt. The warehouse was quiet around them. The space heater pushed warm air across the cold concrete. Outside, the rain had thinned to something less aggressive. Marcello looked at Nora in the folding chair with her broken arm and her 3 ibuprofen and her 18 months of careful and involuntary intelligence gathering, and he felt something that did not have a simple name. Not admiration, though that was present in it, something that recognized a specific kind of endurance, the kind that requires sustained attention over a long period of time while appearing not to be paying attention at all. If those records are in that safe, Luca said, then we have something the federal operation does not have, Marcello said, and something Preston does not have access to anymore. He turned the logic over. The case needs the physical records to be fully prosecutable. If we have the physical records, we control what the case becomes. The apartment will be under surveillance, Luca said. After tonight, after the convoy, after everything, they may already have a unit on the building. Or they may not, Nora said, because they do not know I know about the safe. They think I am with you, and they believe you are keeping me away from the apartment. Why would they watch a location they do not expect anyone to approach? Because they are thorough, Luca said. Yes, she said, but are they fast enough? She looked at Marcello. Riverside Tower has a maintenance elevator on the south side of the building. It bypasses the front desk in the main elevator bank entirely. It comes out in the parking sublevel, which connects to the residential corridor. Preston showed it to me once. He used it for arrivals he did not want logged with building security. She reached into the pocket of her slacks and produced a card. Her building access card. Preston had not taken it before he left. He had assumed she could not get to her feet. Another thing he had underestimated. Marcello sat very still for a moment, with all of it arranged in front of him. The federal case. Sean Calloway's 14 months of damage. Raymond Feld's fear moving him toward a decision that could not be undone. The physical records in a safe behind a painting in a penthouse that was possibly under surveillance. A woman with a broken arm and an access card and 2 combination sequences held in memory. He looked at Luca. Luca looked back with the expression of a man who knows exactly what is coming and has already begun composing his objections. 2 people, Marcello said. Quiet entry, targeted extraction, Out in under 6 minutes. If there is a unit on the building, we abort immediately. Lucas set his tablet on the table. You personally going back into that building tonight is... The records are what ends this cleanly, Marcello said. Raymond making a deal before we have the records is what ends this in the other direction. He held Luca's gaze. Clock. Luca pressed his lips together. She is not going in, Luca said, meaning Nora. I am actually, Nora said. Both men looked at her. She stood from the folding chair. The movement cost her something. Her jaw tightened, and she breathed through it, and she stood straight and faced them. I know where the safe is. I know both combinations. I know the layout of that apartment in complete darkness because I have navigated it in complete darkness more times than I want to count for reasons I will not go into. She looked at Luca. You have never been inside. Going in blind on a 6-minute window means you spend 3 minutes finding the right room. She looked at Marcello. My right hand opens safes. My right arm works fine. Luca looked at the ceiling of the warehouse with the expression of a man losing an argument he has not technically begun. Marcello looked at Nora. She looked back at him. There was something in this moment. The two of them in the cold warehouse at 2 in the morning with the space heater running and the rain on the roof and the decision in front of them. Something that had the quality of a hinge, a before and after. The kind of moment you can locate later and say that was where everything that followed became possible. 6 minutes, he said. 6 minutes, she said. If anything feels wrong on approach, we pull back. No deliberation. Agreed. And when we are out, he said, with or without the records, you tell me everything. All of it. Whatever you know about Preston's operation, the calls, the names, the patterns, everything. She nodded. In exchange, he said, the people who are currently trying to put you in a room and use you as an instrument do not get the opportunity. You are not a witness in this case. You are a woman who sent a text to the wrong number. That is the story. I will make it the only story. She was quiet for a second. You can do that, she said. Yes. She looked at him for another beat. Okay, she said. Luca was already pulling up the building layout on his tablet, cross-referencing traffic camera feeds in the surrounding blocks, with the focused competence of a man who has shifted from objection to execution. One unit, he said after a moment. Southeast corner of the building stationary. Unmarked, but the positioning is coverage-oriented, watching the main entrance in the primary elevator bank. The maintenance elevator on the south side exits into the parking sublevel, which connects to the residential quarter through a passage not covered by any external camera. Building interior cameras only, and the access card entry will register as a standard authorized resident entry. Normal and routine. It will, Nora said. Luca, check the time. If Feld is moving tonight, we have approximately 90 minutes before that situation changes the board in a way that cannot be reversed. After that, whatever he tells them. We move in 30 minutes, Marcello said. He looked at Nora. She was standing in the cold of the warehouse with the sling and the access card and the two combinations held in her memory, and she looked back at him with that quality he had been noting since the apartment. The core of readiness underneath the exhaustion. The thing that had not broken even when the arm did. Luca stepped outside to make calls. The men outside the warehouse moved in the dark, running the preparations that men in that kind of work run before something happens. The space heater hummed. The rain pressed lightly on the roof. Marcello sat on the edge of the table and ran the next 90 minutes through his mind, in sequence testing the variables, finding the weak points. He found one he did not like. Sean Calloway. Sean, who had been inside for 14 months. Sean, who had access to the private number and the financial architecture in the medical facility. Sean, who had disappeared at midnight and whose phone was dark. Sean, who, if he had been thorough and a man who maintained cover for 14 months without detection, was by definition thorough, might have left something behind that Marcello had not yet located. He picked up the private phone, went to the contact list. 8 entries. He examined each one. His attorney, Franklin, Luca, Cole, his sister, 2 associates, and Sean Calloway. He opened Sean's contact entry. Call history was normal. Text history was normal. The last communication 3 days ago, a routine check-in that had registered as exactly what it appeared to be. But in the notes field of the contact beneath the sparse operational details, Marcello had entered when Sean joined. There was a line he had not written. 4 words. Bring her in now. The same 4 words from the earlier text message. But it was not the words that made his chest go cold. It was the timestamp on the note. It had been added to Sean Calloway's contact entry at 10:34 in the evening. Before the text from Nora, before Riverside Tower, before any of it, Marcello sat on the edge of the table in the Kensington warehouse and held the private phone in both hands and felt the architecture of the evening rearrange itself around this single fact into a shape that was entirely different from the shape he had been navigating. This was not a directive composed in response to tonight. This was a directive that had been placed in his phone and left there waiting for the moment that Nora Callahan entered the equation. Someone had known she would. Someone had known before tonight that she would reach out and had known what number she would reach and had known that Marcello would respond and had positioned the directive in his own phone to be found at exactly the right moment. This was not a case being built. This was a trap being closed. And the mechanism of the trap, the text message, the wrong number, the broken arm, the rain in the dying battery, and Nora Callahan on the floor of apartment 32C, all of it had been constructed and aimed with precision at something specific in him, something foundational, something that a careful person, given enough time and enough information about his past, could locate and use. He looked up. Nora was watching him from across the warehouse. She had seen something change in his face. Her eyes were sharp and still and waiting. He set the phone on the table. "How well," he said quietly, "do you know Ren Halsey?" The question arrived in the warehouse the way a stone arrives in still water. The impact small, the rings spreading outward until they touched every edge. Nora did not answer it immediately, not because she was deciding whether to answer, because the question itself had done something to her face that lasted less than a second and was gone the involuntary compression of someone confronted with the exact question they were not prepared for. Marcello had spent 15 years reading rooms, and reading faces in that fraction of a second told him more than a full sentence would have. He waited. "She is my closest friend," Nora said. "Since college. We have known each other for 8 years. And she told you about switching carriers," Marcello said. 3 weeks ago. "Yes, she mentioned it once, said she had a new number and I should update my contact for her. And you did not." Nora looked at him. "I kept meaning to, I forgot. She switched carriers, I said I would update it, and then..." She stopped. Ren did not follow up about it. She mentioned it once and then she did not ask again if I had updated it. She never checked. "She knew you would not," Marcello said. Nora's face had changed. The warmth had left it, not replaced by coldness, but by the flatness of someone running a calculation they do not want to complete. "If I had updated the contact, she said the text would have gone to Ren's new number. Ren comes to the apartment, or calls the police, or both. Instead, Marcello said you sent it to the old number, the number that had been redirected to mine." She looked at him. "How does someone redirect a decommissioned number to a private line without it showing in any carrier record?" "With access to carrier back-end infrastructure," Marcello said, "which is the kind of access a federal operation running a long-term infiltration builds over time. You redirect a deactivated number to a target line for a specific window, long enough for one communication to pass through. Then you remove it. It leaves no trace in standard records. You would only find it if you knew precisely where to look and had reason to look." Nora placed her right hand flat against her sternum, a small and involuntary gesture. The physical location of betrayal when it arrives in the chest. "She knew Preston was going to hurt me tonight," Nora said. Ren knew. She paused. She knew the situation in that apartment well enough to know that at some point there would be a night like this one. And she made sure that when that night came, the number I reached for in the dark did not go where I believed it would go. Marcello said nothing. "They used my broken arm," Nora said. She said it very quietly. "They used the fact that he would eventually hurt me badly enough that I would reach for help. They built the whole thing around that, around the certainty that one night Preston would go far enough." She looked at the concrete floor, and Ren was inside that. Ren was part of that. For how long? "Long enough to understand your situation well enough to predict it," Marcello said. "Long enough to be positioned. Whether she understood the full scope of what she was involved in, I cannot tell you yet." Nora was quiet for a long time. "What am I," she asked finally, "in this? What am I in all of it?" Marcello held her gaze. He could have softened the answer. He understood exactly why someone in her position would want it softened. He chose not to. "You were the mechanism," he said, "constructed and aimed. A distress signal calibrated to reach me specifically. Someone who understood." He paused for one brief moment. Who understood what I would do when I received a message of that kind on that number? His mother. The Brooklyn hallway. The sound he had never found a way to unremember. Someone had found the load-bearing wall in him and had aimed at it with enough precision to bring him across the city in the rain at midnight. Nora was looking at the floor. "How long have you known my private number?" Marcello said. The question landed. She looked up at him. Her jaw was set. Her eyes held his without moving away. "Before tonight," she said. The warehouse was very quiet around them. "Before tonight," he said again. "Yes." Luca came through the side door at that moment, reading the room in 1 second and accurately. He looked at Marcello's face and then at Nora, and then back at Marcello, and he did not say anything immediately because he understood that something significant had just concluded, and the space required a moment before the next thing began. Marcello told him in under 2 minutes. Luca sat on the table and listened, and his expression moved through 3 distinct stages. Disbelief lasting approximately 1 second, calculation lasting 4. Then the controlled stillness of a man revising a threat assessment upward by a meaningful degree and accepting the revision. "The friend," Luca said. "Asset," Marcello said. "Witting or not, I cannot confirm yet. She may have been recruited with full knowledge. She may have been cultivated, gradually fed information about Preston, encouraged to maintain the friendship, prompted to make the carrier switch at the right moment." He paused. Either way, the function was the same. Nora had sat back down in the folding chair. She was sitting with her right elbow on her knee and her forehead resting on her right hand, looking at the floor, very still. "Nora," Marcello said. She lifted her head. "I need you present," he said. "What you are feeling, keep it, use it later. Right now, I need your head." She looked at him for a moment. Then she sat up straight. "The safe," she said. "We still need the records." "Yes, and we need them before Feld makes his move." "Yes." She stood. The movement pulled at her arm and she took it and stood straight anyway. "Then let us go," she said. They went in through the south side of the building at 2:47 in the morning. The rain had thinned to a fine mist that settled on Marcello's jacket and on Nora's hair without accumulating. The street on the south side of Riverside Tower was empty. Luca had confirmed the stationary unit on the southeast corner had not moved in 30 minutes. The maintenance entrance was 40 feet from the nearest camera angle. The window was clean. Nora swiped the access card at the maintenance door. The reader blinked green. The door opened. They moved through the parking sublevel without rushing, the pace of 2 people who belong where they are and are simply moving through it. Nora knew the space. She had navigated it before in different circumstances and for different reasons, and her feet found the path with the confidence of someone whose knowledge is stored in the body rather than the mind. Marcello stayed a half step behind and matched her adjustments without instruction. The maintenance elevator was older than the main bank. Freight width, no mirror. It smelled of cleaning products and metal and the staleness of a space used only for utility. Nora pressed the button for the 32nd floor. The doors closed. In the enclosed space, Marcello could hear her breathing, measured and deliberate, the controlled breathing of someone managing pain and adrenaline simultaneously and refusing to let either one win. "How is the arm?" he said. "Functional." "That is not what I asked." "It is what I have." She looked at the doors. "Ask me again in an hour." 32nd floor. The doors opened onto the residential corridor. The same carpeted hallway with the same recessed lighting and the hush of expensive buildings at midnight. To the left, the main elevator bank. To the right, apartment 32C. Both directions clear. They moved right. The apartment door was still broken. The hinges had given when Cole put his shoulder through it several hours earlier, and the door leaned into the frame at an angle that made the lock irrelevant. The hallway outside showed no fresh activity, no tape, no police presence, no indication that anyone had been through since they left. Marcello pushed the door open with one hand and they went in. The apartment was dark and carried the stillness of a place where violence has occurred and then been abandoned. Glass still on the floor near the dining table. Preston's whiskey glass on the kitchen counter still holding an inch of amber. The ghost of the evening present in the arrangement of broken things. Nora moved without hesitation. She went through the living room into the corridor and left into the master bedroom, and Marcello was a half step behind her. She knew the layout the way she had said she would, in the dark and from memory. Her feet found the path without visible effort, crossing the room to the far wall where a large canvas hung abstract black and gold on white, and she reached up with her right hand and lifted it from the wall. Behind it, flush with the surface, a keypad safe. She entered the first combination from memory, her fingers moving quickly and without hesitation across the pad. The safe did not open. She entered the second combination. The safe opened. Inside a manila envelope, 3 inches thick with folded documents, a small external hard drive, a passport in a name that was not Preston Gaunt's, and $20,000 in banded hundreds that Marcello did not touch. He took the envelope and the hard drive and nothing else. Nora had already turned toward the door. They had been in the apartment for 90 seconds. Marcello was 2 steps from the bedroom doorway when he heard it. From the living room, from the direction of the broken front door, a sound that was not the building's ambient noise and not the mist on the windows. A footstep, deliberate and careful and almost inaudible. Almost. He put his hand on Nora's shoulder and stopped her. They stood together in the bedroom doorway and listened. Another footstep. Then the sound of someone who had entered through the broken door and was moving through the living room and was trying very hard not to be heard and was nearly succeeding, which meant someone with training, someone who understood how to move through a space with intent. One person, moving slowly, coming from the direction of the front entrance. Marcello positioned himself against the bedroom wall beside the doorframe on the hinge side. He looked at Nora and made one small gesture. She read it and moved back toward the window wall without sound. The footsteps reached the corridor, stopped. Whoever it was knew that they were there. The building entry log would have shown a recent authorized access. The apartment was a known location and they had entered it anyway, which meant either confidence or desperation, and both of those presented their own dangers. A voice came through the darkness of the corridor. One word. Nora. Male. The voice of someone who had used her name before. The tone of someone who expected to find her and was confirming it. Nora had gone rigid. Marcello looked at her face in the dark, and what he saw there told him everything he needed to know. She knew that voice. And from the way it moved through her body before she could stop it, it was not the voice of anyone from the federal investigation, or from Raymond Feld's organization, or from any category Marcello had been navigating. Preston, she whispered. Preston Gaunt had come back. Not running after all, or running here first, which meant the go bag and the disappearance, and the 10 minutes after the convoy departed had not been a flight. It had been a recalculation. Preston had gone out, regrouped, in return for the one thing he had not taken when he left. The safe. He had come back for the safe, and he was 3 feet from the bedroom doorway when Marcello stepped out of the wall. Preston had a small flashlight in his left hand and his phone in his right, and he had been moving through the corridor in the half-crouched posture of a man trying to occupy as little space as possible. He had approximately a quarter of a second to register the shape emerging from the dark before Marcello's right hand connected with his jaw, and the flashlight hit the corridor floor, and the phone skittered into the baseboard. Preston went down hard. Not all the way out. He hit the floor on his hands and knees with his head ringing and looked up through streaming eyes at the man standing over him and made the connection after several seconds with the delay of a man whose brain is attempting to function through significant physical disruption. You, Preston said. His voice was broken glass. Get up, Marcello said. Preston was already reaching for something. Not a weapon, a position. The same social architecture of authority he had been trying to rebuild since the first time Marcello had put him on the floor tonight. I came for my things, Preston said. That is my apartment. You broke my... Get up, Marcello said. Preston got up. He used the wall. He was not entirely stable, his jaw bleeding onto the collar of the shirt he had changed into since they had last seen each other. The expensive white shirt, the same category of garment, different instance. Because some people's costumes are structural. He saw Nora standing in the doorway. Something moved in his face when he saw her. Something that presented itself as concern, and he had something harder underneath it. The tone of a man who has decided that the woman is the available leverage and is preparing to use her. Nora, he said, whatever he has told you, whatever is happening right now, this is bigger than you understand. Those documents are not something you want to be carrying. They are not in the safe, Marcello said. Preston's eyes moved to him instantly. I already have them, Marcello said. The calculation in Preston's face shifted. The reorganization of a man whose last available play has just been removed from the board. His eyes moved back to Nora with something that had shed the pretense of concern. You told him, he said. You told him about the safe. His voice had changed again. Something older and less managed coming through the surface. You told him the combination. After everything. After everything I kept you from. They would have used you, Nora. Do you understand what they would have done with you if they had gotten you in that room? You broke my arm, she said. The sentence closed his mouth completely, the way a wall stops movement, clean and absolute. You broke my arm, she said again. Not louder, not with more force. The same flat, inescapable statement of a fact that did not require emphasis because it was already carrying all the weight that exists. Tonight at 11:47, you broke my arm and told me I made you do it and left me on the floor. She looked at him with an expression that Marcello had not seen on her before. This was not the pain and not the exhaustion and not the careful assessment. This was a woman who had arrived at a place she had been walking toward for a long time without knowing the destination. Everything that happened after that is because you broke my arm. That is the only thing that is true tonight. Preston's face went very still. Then without warning he moved, not at Marcello, at Nora. The move of a man who has run out of every other option and has reached the calculation that the woman is the one variable he can still control. His hand went for her right arm, the arm not in the sling reaching to pull her in front of him, the mechanics of someone who has spent considerable time establishing that her body is something he can direct. He got his hand on her wrist. Marcello removed it. One motion, a single redirecting force applied at the correct point of Preston's elbow, and Preston's hand left Nora's wrist, and Preston's arm moved in a direction. Arms are not designed to move. And Preston made a sound that contained both rage and something rawer and less constructed. Marcello put him against the wall. Not gently. The corridor wall, Preston's back against it, Marcello's forearm across his chest at a height that made the difference in their sizes irrelevant. Close enough that the breadth between them was measurable in inches. Last time, Marcello said quietly. Just those two words. He let the sentence be what it was and nothing else. Let Preston look at his face from 8 inches away and understand in his body what last time meant in practical terms. Preston understood. The resistance left him, not from courage, from the absence of remaining fuel. Preston Gaunt's energy had always come from feeling larger than whatever he was facing, and standing 8 inches from Marcello Vane, with a broken jaw and an inventory of everything the evening had cost him, there was no remaining source for that feeling. His body went slack against the wall. Marcello stepped back. The documents, Preston said. His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. If you have those documents, you have everything. Every transaction I processed for every organization, including yours. He paused. You know what they will do with that if it surfaces. You know what that means for everyone whose money is in those records. I know what I will do with it, Marcello said. Preston looked at him with the eyes of a man sorting through what remains when everything else is gone. There is a federal agent, he said. His name is. Cole's number was already dialed on the regular phone. Marcello handed it to the man who appeared at the broken door frame and gave him 3 sentences in a low voice. Preston would be held and processed through the attorney in the morning. Not harmed. Removed from the equation until the equation resolved. Then Marcello walked back to where Nora was standing in the bedroom doorway, and the hallway was quiet and the 2-hour window was open and burning, and the particular urgency of all of it pressed against the walls around them. He looked at her. She looked at him. How long, he said, have you known my private number? She did not look away. Before tonight, she said. The corridor held what it held. Marcello stood in it with the documents inside his jacket and the clock running, and the woman standing 8 feet away, looking at him with the most complicated expression he had encountered in a night that had been full of complicated things. Because it was not the expression of someone caught. It was the expression of someone who had known this moment was coming and had been carrying the weight of its approach for a considerable amount of time. Not because of what it would cost her, because of what it would cost him. He gave her 4 minutes. He walked Preston back into the living room and seated him in the chair nearest the broken door, with Cole standing behind him, and told Preston that if he moved before everything was settled, the evening would conclude in a way Preston would not find preferable. Preston sat. He looked small in the chair. All the expensive architecture of the life he had constructed around him, and he looked like something that had been left behind when the actual version of the room moved out. Marcello went back through the corridor. Nora was where he had left her. He looked at her. She looked at him. The corridor was quiet and the mist pressed at the window at the far end. 4 minutes, he said. Start. She started. I was recruited 14 months ago, she said, not by a federal agency directly, by a woman named Diana Marsh. Diana runs a private intelligence contractor that does work for federal agencies on contract. She came to me through Wren. I thought Wren had arranged an introduction to a consulting position with a nonprofit organization. She paused. It was not a nonprofit. Not a... Marcello listened. Diana told me Preston Gaunt was a target, that he was processing money for dangerous people, and that there was a federal case being assembled against him and against the network he serviced. She said they needed someone on the inside, someone who could maintain proximity without raising concern. She paused. Someone who was already positioned near Preston's world. You were not already positioned, Marcello said. You met him 2 months before you moved in. Yes, Diana introduced us. At a gallery opening in Old City. She told me he would be there. She told me what he responded to, a beat. I wore the right dress. I said the right things. Preston asked for my number. She paused. I reported back to Diana within the hour. 4 minutes. He let her continue. For the first 6 months, it was observation. What he said on the phone, who came to the apartment, financial patterns I could see without accessing anything directly. I sent weekly reports through an encrypted application on a secondary phone I kept in a storage locker on Market Street. She exhaled. Then Diana told me they needed the physical records, that Preston kept paper documentation, and that I needed to locate the safe. I found it 4 months in. I never gave Diana the combination because I did not have it until 3 months ago. Preston changed it in front of me accidentally. He had been drinking. He believed I was asleep. He consistently underestimated you, Marcello said. It was one of his most reliable qualities. Diana gave you my number, Marcello said, 8 weeks ago. She told me to memorize it, store it under Wren's name in my contact lists, and that I would know when to use it. She paused. She said you were the significant target, that Preston alone was not sufficient for what they were building, that you were the key to the larger structure. She looked at him directly. She said you would come. She had a psychological profile. She described a specific vulnerability, something from your past that would make a distress message of that kind impossible for you to ignore. My mother, he said. She did not say it specifically. She said you had a wound that ran in a particular direction, that the message needed to come from that direction. She paused, and something in how she held her breath told him what came next had been sitting in her for a long time. She said you would carry her out of the building. She predicted that specifically, as a detail. She was proud of the specificity. Nora looked at the corridor floor. I thought she was being dramatic. He stood in the corridor and absorbed this with the flat, controlled exterior that processed impact inward and showed nothing on the surface. The machinery of him working beneath the stillness. Diana Marsh had mapped his damage with precision and had aimed at exactly the right place. You knew who I was, he said, before tonight. I knew your name, your general profile, the scale of what you operate. She paused. I did not know you. That is a distinction. Is it a meaningful one, he asked. She looked at him. I have been in that apartment for 14 months, she said. For the last 8 of those, I had stopped caring about Diana's operation, about the case, about the objective. She paused. Preston was what he was, and I had chosen to remain inside something that was damaging me because I believed the objective justified the damage, and then the objective stopped justifying it, and I was simply inside something that was damaging me. She met his gaze steadily. Tonight was not a mission. When I reached for that phone with 2% battery and a broken arm, I was not running an operation. I was trying not to be alone on that floor. She paused. The number being there stored under Wren's name, that was 8 weeks of Diana telling me when the moment comes, use the number. I did not think tonight was that moment. I was reaching for my friend in the dark. 4 minutes had come and gone. He knew it. He stood in the corridor and held the weight of everything she had said and tested it against what he knew and what he felt and what he was capable of believing at the end of a night that had required him to revise his understanding of things more than once. He knew this about himself. He was not a person who was easily deceived over time. And the truth of that moment in the apartment, the battery dying, the cracked screen, the shaking hands, the stripped syntax of someone with nothing left but 6 words, and the hope that someone would hear them. That moment did not change under examination. It held. Diana Marsh had built a machine and aimed it at him. The machine had a human being inside it. And somewhere across the distance of 14 months, in a gallery opening in Old City, in a broken arm on a marble floor, the human being and the machine had become two separate things. "You were sent to Preston," he said. "I was the wrong number." She looked at him. Something in her face moved that was not quite a smile, but was related to one. The recognition of a distance covered, a cost paid, an arrival at the far side of something that was not guaranteed. "Does that matter to you?" she asked. "It matters what changed," he said. She held his gaze, then she exhaled slowly. "And Diana," she said, "she will be at Callahan Yards. Almost certainly, Doss is how she collects. She does not appear directly, but she will be close enough. And if you walk in with the records and no leverage beyond them, she takes them and the case folds inward on everyone in it." He looked at the documents inside his jacket. "Including you. You are not a protected asset if this unravels incorrectly. You were an operative who departed from the sanctioned mission. That is a liability, not an asset in Diana's accounting." "I know," Nora said. "So we need leverage that is not the records alone." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Diana Marsh has been running an unauthorized private intelligence operation on American soil, targeting American citizens, in coordination with but not officially sanctioned by the federal agencies she contracts for." She paused. "I know this because she told me." She liked to explain the scope of what she was building. She was proud of it. "You documented it," Marcello said. "The secondary phone," she said, "in the Market Street locker. 14 months of encrypted reports, Diana's directives, Sean Calloway's access protocols, the phone rerouting procedure, the full operational record. A beat. Diana taught me to document everything. She did not specify that the documentation should benefit only her." Marcello looked at her. "You kept copies of everything. Every communication, every directive, every contact." She held his gaze. "The decryption key is 12 characters. I am the only person who has it." "The locker key," he said. She reached into the pocket of her slacks and produced a small key on a plain ring. She held it out. He took it. "Let us go," he said. Luca moved ahead to retrieve the secondary phone from the Market Street locker, while Marcello and Nora made their way down through the building and back into the rain-cleared air. The city was past 3 in the morning now, the streets almost entirely empty. The rain had stopped completely and left behind only the cleared air and the wet reflections of streetlights on asphalt. They drove north toward Callahan Yards. Luca confirmed the secondary phone retrieved and in hand as they crossed into the northern neighborhoods, the city opening up around them. Architecture shifting from center city density to the older industrial bones of areas that had outlasted their original purpose. In the vehicle, Nora said nothing for the first several minutes. Marcello sat beside her and looked through the windshield. He thought about the arrangement he was about to propose. The leverage he was about to put on a table in front of a woman who had spent 14 months building a case she believed in and who would not simply fold because he asked her to. He thought about Diana's profile of him, the wound that runs in the direction of protection. She had been right about what it was. She had aimed at it correctly, and it had worked exactly as she predicted. What she had not calculated was Nora. The Callahan Yards was a decommissioned rail facility covering 12 acres of overgrown track and abandoned switching houses in 3 large maintenance buildings that had accumulated over years of emptiness, the atmosphere of places that hold things in suspension. Old metal, standing water, the quiet of a space where noise has stopped, but the absence of it still carries the shape of everything it used to contain. They stopped a quarter-mile short. Marcello got out and looked at the main building for 60 seconds. One light visible through a high window, a single vehicle at the northeast corner, dark, no visible plates at this distance. The chain-link fencing along the perimeter was old and had gaps that were not accidental. Luca had the layout, one confirmed unit inside based on the vehicle. Doss typically brought 3 to 4 people to these kinds of meetings. He did not like crowds. Crowds complicated the accounting. 2 people going in, Marcello said. Nora was already beside him. She had been beside him since the building, close enough that he was aware of her in the cold air. Her arm in the sling, her jaw set, her eyes on the structure ahead. "The decryption key," he said. 12 characters. You have it memorized. "Yes, if we walk in there with both documents and Diana controls the room." He said we need to establish what we hold before Doss sets the terms. That means you need to be willing to be present when Diana calculates what you are worth to her operation. I am already in this room, she said. I have been in the room for 14 months. This room is different. In that room, you are not an operative who departed from mission parameters. You are a direct liability to Diana's exposure, and she will assess you accordingly. I know what Diana does with liabilities, Nora said. She told me about 3 of them. As cautionary examples, her voice was even and deliberate. The only way out of Diana's calculation is to change what the variables are worth before she finishes calculating. Stay close, he said. I have been staying close since Riverside Tower. They went in through the northeast gap in the fence. Single file Luca first, then Marcello, then Nora, then the 2 men behind. The rail yard was wet, the ballast stones slicked the rusted tracks, interrupting the ground in uneven intervals. 100 yards of open ground to the maintenance building. They crossed it at the pace of people who had decided that moving as though they belonged was the only viable approach. The building's side door was open. Inside, the smell of oil and concrete, and the cold of an enclosed space that has gone unheated for years. The work lamp on a folding table at the center of the building. At the table sat Warren Doss, 65 years old, small and precise and gray at the temples. The kind of suit that announced nothing about its quantity. A glass of water in front of him, and a folder on the table, and 3 men visible in the surrounding shadows with the practiced discipline of people who were paid to be seen. Standing beside Doss was a woman Marcello had not met before, but recognized immediately from Nora's description. Diana Marsh, 50 perhaps, a year or 2 on either side. Dark jacket, hair that had been composed at the start of the evening and was now slightly undone from the accumulated weight of it. The posture of someone accustomed to being the most organized presence in any room, currently managing the tension of a situation that has declined to organize itself according to plan. Her eyes went to Nora the moment the group entered. Something crossed Diana's face when she saw her. Not surprise. The surprise had already been processed. Something harder than surprise. The expression of a chess player watching a piece move to a square it was categorically not supposed to be able to reach. Doss stood, the voice of a man who finds the proceedings genuinely engaging. Marcello, I appreciate the punctuality, Warren Marcello said. He did not look at Diana yet. He sat across from Doss with the deliberate economy of someone establishing that the urgency in this room did not belong to him. Luca stood at his right, Nora stood at his left, 1 step back. Diana was looking at Nora with the attention of someone examining something they constructed and then lost and are now watching operate in an entirely different context. I understand you have documentation that several parties have an interest in, Doss said. He had the cadence of a man for whom the negotiation itself, the arrangement of competing interests into a temporary structure, was the genuine pleasure of the work. I have been asked to facilitate a conversation about how that documentation is handled. By whom, Marcello said. Several parties. He smiled fractionally, each with their own accounting. I have a specific question about one of them, Marcello said. He looked at Diana Marsh for the first time. Your operation, he said. Who sanctions it? Diana held his gaze with the practiced stillness of someone trained to present stillness as authority. That is not relevant to tonight. It is the only thing relevant to tonight. You have been running a domestic intelligence operation for 14 months. Private operatives. Rerouted telecommunications infrastructure. Planted assets inside an organization that has not been charged with or convicted of any criminal offense. Under a contract that, if examined carefully, does not explicitly authorize the methods you have employed. He paused, which means the people whose names appear on that contract are significantly exposed. You are describing a hypothetical, Diana said. I am describing a 14-month operational record, Marcello said. He looked at Doss, which is what we are here to discuss. He reached into his jacket and placed the manila envelope on the table. Then he looked at Nora. Nora reached into the sling with her right hand and produced the secondary phone, the matte black device that Luca had retrieved from the Market Street locker. She placed it on the table beside the envelope. Preston Gaunt's transaction records, Marcello said. Every paper trail your case has been missing. And 14 months of Diana Marsh's operational communications, asset directives, method documentation. He looked at Diana, including the communications regarding the rerouting of a private telephone number to mine, the psychological profile constructed to engineer my response, the deliberate staging of a domestic violence incident as a trigger mechanism. He paused. using a woman inside that incident as bait. The room was very quiet. Doss looked at the table with what appeared to be genuine professional appreciation. Diana was looking at Nora. "You built a parallel record," she said. Her voice carried the control of someone who has spent years learning to modulate it, with a hairline fracture now running through the surface. "From month 4, Nora said, when I understood your operation had no plan for what happened to me when it concluded." She held Diana's gaze. "I was a mechanism. I needed to become a person with leverage. You taught me how to document. You taught me what mattered and how to preserve it." She paused. "You did not specify that it should only be preserved in your favor." Diana started to say something. "No," Nora said. The word came out flat and final, and Diana closed her mouth. Marcello laid out the arrangement in the precise level voice he used when he was stating terms that were not invitations to negotiation, but descriptions of what existed. Preston Gaunt's transaction records and Diana Marsh's operational record into secured storage, controlled by his attorney. Neither document to move unless conditions were violated. In exchange, Diana's operation closed. Sean Calloway out of Philadelphia within 1 week. All case material built from Sean's 14 months of access to become unusable. Raymond Feld to make his own decisions without pressure from Diana's organization. Nora Callahan, a private citizen with no official connection to any investigation in any direction. Diana looked at the phone on the table. "The decryption key," she said, her eyes on Nora. "Without it, the operational record is noise." "Yes," Nora said. "You are the only one with it?" "Yes." Diana looked at her for a long moment. The expression on her face moved through something that Marcello could not quite read and suspected Diana could not entirely control. The recognition of someone who designed a tool and is now watching the tool exercise a judgment she did not build into it. Then Diana said very quietly the words intended for Nora alone: "I underestimated you." Nora looked back at her without warmth and without coldness. "Everyone did," she said. "For a long time, it was the most useful thing about me." The arrangement was made in the cold of the Callahan Yards maintenance building, without paperwork and without signatures, bound instead by the mutual architecture of exposure that made it more durable than any contract. Doss would serve as the neutral record of its existence, the documentation of the arrangement itself a deterrent to its violation. But as they were moving toward the door, Luca's phone buzzed. He read the message, and his voice came out stripped to pure information. "Preston made a call before Cole got there," he said. 40 seconds to an unregistered number. He looked at Marcello. "Sean Calloway is not leaving the city. He is moving toward Federal Plaza." Marcello stopped. Sean was not running. Sean was moving toward his federal handler. Not Diana, not a contractor. Someone inside the actual agency. Someone whose name was on no contract and who had never appeared in any arrangement. "The arrangement with Diana does not cover whoever is above her," Marcello said. The maintenance building was very quiet around them. Diana looked at the floor. She did not confirm it. She did not deny it. Nora had already worked through it. She spoke before Marcello did. "It does not have to cover them," she said. "Sean arrives at Federal Plaza as a compromised asset from an unauthorized operation. If the operational record reaches the Office of Internal Review before Sean gets there, everything he carries walks in the door already flagged." She looked at Marcello. "I need a laptop and a secure connection." Luca, 6 minutes. They left Callahan Yards at 3:49 in the morning. The vehicle stopped at a brownstone on Callow Hill Street at 4:17 in the morning. Luca had a laptop open before they were fully inside. He set it on the kitchen table and stepped back. Nora sat down. She pulled the secondary phone toward her with her right hand. She opened the encrypted archive with the 12-character key she had been carrying in her memory for 8 weeks, the key Diana had never asked about, because Diana had never imagined a version of events in which Nora would use it against her. The archive opened. 14 months of documentation. Diana's directives. Sean Calloway's access protocols. The carrier rerouting procedure time-stamped and sourced. The psychological profile of Marcello Vane written in the precise clinical language of someone who believed she understood the architecture of another person completely. Nora looked at that document for 3 seconds. Then she moved past it. She connected to the Office of Internal Review's secure submission portal, the address Diana had made her memorize as an emergency exfiltration channel, and which Diana had therefore never thought to block. She uploaded the full archive. She added a cover document, 12 lines, no name, stating clearly what the materials contained and what they documented and what they meant for the case currently being built around Sean Calloway's access to a private organization. She hit submit at 4:31 in the morning. The confirmation appeared on the screen. Timestamp logged, receipt number generated. She closed the laptop. Marcello was standing across the kitchen watching her. Done, she said. Luca checked his phone. Sean Calloway entered Federal Plaza at 4:53. He paused. The case coordinator on his operation has been flagged for internal review. That notification went out 11 minutes ago. Nora looked at the table, the receipt number on the closed laptop screen. Whatever Sean carries in there, she said he carries it as a compromised asset into a flagged operation. Everything he delivers becomes evidence of the operation itself. Yes, Luca said. She sat with that for a moment. Then she looked at Marcello and said, "It is done." They left at 4:36 in the morning and drove south through streets that were mostly empty, now the city in its quiet space between the end of one thing and the beginning of another. The sky over Philadelphia had moved past the full dark of deep night into the gray that precedes dawn by several degrees. Not light yet, but no longer night. Fairmount House. Luca held the door. Nora got out first. She stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the brownstone, and then at the sky, which was the color of pewter, with the first thin line at the horizon suggesting what was coming. She stood there for a moment with her broken arm, and her borrowed coat, and her 14 months, and her decryption key, and her one intact hand at her side. Marcello stood beside her. He did not say anything. She did not either. They stood in the cleared air after the rain and looked at the beginning of the sky and existed for a moment as two people who had come through something hard and were on the other side of it and had not collapsed. Then Nora exhaled. Long and slow, the full decompression of a chest that has been held tight for a very long time. She turned toward the door. Marcello followed. Inside, the house was warm. Luca moved ahead and found where things were. Lights in the kitchen, water running somewhere, the sounds of a space adjusting to occupation after a long quiet. Marcello showed Nora the guest room on the second floor. The door that locked from the inside. She stood in the doorway. The arm, he said. Elevation. There are extra pillows in the closet. She looked at him. There was something she had been carrying toward this moment for the length of the night. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Ask." "When you read the note in Sean's contact file, the timestamp." She paused. "In the time between that and asking me how well I knew Ren, what did you think?" He considered the question honestly. "I thought he said that either you were part of the machine that had been running at me for 14 months, in which case I was in a significant problem, or you were someone who had been placed inside that machine without fully understanding its scope and had found a way over time to run it in a different direction than it was built to go." He paused. "I was not certain which." "And now," she said, "now I know it was both," he said, "and that the second became more true over time than the first." She looked at him for a long moment. "Is that enough?" she asked. "For you to?" She stopped, restarted. "I was sent to you. That is a fact that does not change regardless of what changed after it." "You were sent to Preston," he said. "I was the wrong number." A beat. Something moved in her face, not quite a smile. The recognition of a distance covered and a cost paid, and the quality of standing on the other side of something that was not guaranteed to him. "The knowledge that you arrived." She looked down. "Get some sleep," he said. He turned and walked back down the hallway. He heard her door close. He stood at the end of the hallway for a moment and listened to the house settle around him. Luca in the kitchen below, the ordinary sounds of a place that was lived in. He went downstairs. Luca had coffee on, ground properly, not from a machine, and the smell of it was the smell of 5 in the morning and a long night on the other side and the possibility of what comes after. Marcello sat at the kitchen table. Luca set a cup in front of him and sat across, and they sat without speaking for a time, which was the appropriate thing. "Cleanup will take a week," Luca said eventually. "I know. Sean is still out there. He will surface somewhere. He will not come back here," Feld Marcello said. "Give him a week, then a controlled meeting. Let him find the new weather and adjust. He is skilled at surviving. Let him use that skill." Luca nodded. He paused. "And Nora," he said, with the careful neutrality of 11 years. Marcello looked at the coffee. "She is under the arrangement," he said. "Protected. Her status will be clean by afternoon." "And beyond the arrangement," Luca said. Marcello did not answer immediately. He thought about the corridor at Riverside Tower, the elevator, the warehouse, The corridor outside 32C at 2:41 in the morning. He thought about 4 minutes and everything she had placed inside them. He thought about a woman who had been sent into something and had come out of it with an encrypted phone and two combinations held in memory, and the endurance of someone who had decided somewhere in the dark of 14 months that the only leverage she could trust was the kind she built for herself when no one knew she was building it. "I do not know yet," he said. Luca accepted this. They drank their coffee. Outside, the sky continued its slow work of becoming morning, the pewter gray giving way to something warmer at the edges. The first real light spreading along the Philadelphia horizon, falling on the old brick and the glass towers and the neighborhoods that had existed before all of it and continued to exist alongside it. Marcello set his cup down. He thought about what it meant to be the wrong number, about a trap that worked because it was built on something real. A real wound, a real response, a real boy in a hallway in Brooklyn who had never stopped listening for the sound of someone asking for help in the dark. Diana Marsh had aimed at that. She had found the load-bearing wall and hit it with precision. And the wall had held, not because it was impenetrable, because what it was load-bearing for the thing it supported the structure, it kept standing was the thing Diana had not included in her profile. She had mapped the damage. She had not mapped what the damage had built. Luca washed his cup in the sink and said he would be back in 2 hours and went out. The house was quiet. Marcello stayed at the kitchen table as the light came in through the window. The thin early light of a November morning in Philadelphia, falling across the wood grain and the coffee cup and his hands resting flat on the table. He looked at his hands, the right one the knuckles still faintly marked from the evening. Then he looked at the window and the light coming through it. Upstairs, behind a door that locked from the inside, Nora Callahan slept with her broken arm elevated on borrowed pillows. She was not the person he had believed her to be when he carried her out of the rain. She was more complicated than that, more compromised and more intentional and more surviving. She had been placed into a situation designed to break her in one direction by Preston and in another direction by Diana Marsh. And she had come out of it with her eyes open and her records encrypted, and the quality of someone who has learned that the only thing she can fully trust is what she built herself in the dark when nobody was watching. He was not certain what came after this. The morning the attorney, the week of repair, the longer work of understanding what 14 months had exposed and what could be rebuilt and what could not. He was not certain what the thing between them was, or what it would become, or whether it could survive the weight of its own origin. The trap, the wrong number, the machine and the person inside it choosing to become different things. He was not certain. And for the first time in a long night that had required him to be very certain about a great many things, he was not in a hurry to decide. He picked up the coffee cup, drank what remained. Outside, the city continued. The light widened along the horizon, Philadelphia assembling itself into another day with the indifferent patience of a place that has been through enough to know that what comes after a hard night is simply the morning. He set the cup down and looked at the light coming through the window and sat with the quiet of a man who has come through something and knows it and is not yet certain what surviving it means, only that he is on the other side of it, and the side he is on is the morning, and for now, the morning is enough.